Once again, thank you so much for tuning in to my YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and also like the videos. Today we are going to look at red blood cells. And some of the key things we are going to look at under red blood cells is the introduction to the red blood cells, the normal value, the morphology, the properties, the lifespan, the fate, the functions, the variations in number, size, shape, and structure. Now, if you look at red blood cells, they are non-nucleated formed elements in the body, meaning that they don't have a nucleus. They are also called erythrocytes, and the reason as to why they are called erythrocytes is because they are red. And what makes them red is the hemoglobin, that pigment, the red pigment in blood. Red blood cells carry out vital role of transport of specific respiratory gases. However, there are a number of functions actually they carry out. They are actually the largest in number in the human body compared to all other blood cells like the white blood cells and the platelets. Now, the normal value of red blood cells is normally associated to the red blood cell count, what we can call the RBC count, and this ranges around from 4 to 5.5 millions of cells per cubic millimeters of blood. However, in adult males, you realize that it is 5 millions of cells per cubic millimeters of blood. However, in adult females, it is about 4.5 millions of cells per cubic millimeters. Now, the question would be, why this change? Why the difference? Now, the difference is because if you look at females, especially those after puberty and before menopause, they experience menstruation, which involves constant loss of blood from the body. And this explains the lower RBC count. Now, how do the red blood cells look like? The red blood cells actually are discs that are biconcave shaped. They are thinner in the middle portion. However, their periphery is thicker. You realize that that biconcave shape is very useful because it helps in the equal and rapid diffusion of oxygen and other substances into the cell. Remember that the middle is thin, therefore there is rapid and easy diffusion. It also provides a large surface area for absorption or removal of different substances. Another one is that there is minimal tension that is offered on the membrane when the volume of the cell alters. And because of the biconcave shape, we have it pass through the minute capillaries, squeezing through the capillaries without actually being damaged. The normal size of the red blood cell, we have the diameter is about 7.2 microunits. The thickness may be, of course, we say the periphery is thicker, that is 2.2 microunits. However, for the center, it is about only 1. That is how thin. Therefore, there is easy rapid and rapid diffusion. Its square area is 120 square units, and the volume is about 85 to 90 cubic units, microunits. Now, the normal structure, just like we said, red blood cells are non-nucleated. They don't have a nucleus, except for the red blood cells in a camel. However, if you look at the red blood cells during their formation, we see that at first, during their earliest stage, they have a nucleus. However, this nucleus keeps on becoming smaller and smaller, and then it is eliminated out. Therefore, they lack a nucleus. Actually, they not only lack nucleus, but they also lack other cell organelles like the mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus. And because of absence of the mitochondria, we would think that these cells cannot make energy. No. These cells have enzymes within their cytoplasm that helps them to carry out the glycolytic process that helps to provide energy. Actually, these enzymes also make the cell membrane pliable, like they make the membrane flexible and so that it can easily pass through the thin or minute capillaries in our bodies. These red blood cells do not have insulatory receptors. Therefore, the uptake of glucose is not controlled by insulin. However, the red blood cells have a special cytoskeleton. Now, the cytoskeleton is made up of actin and spectrin. However, these are anchored on proteins, on mainly the transmembrane proteins, by another one we call ankyrin. Now, absence of spectrin results into hereditary spherosis. Now, like you see spherocytosis, hereditary spherocytosis. This is a condition in the cell that makes the cell to lose its biconcave shape and looks like a sphere, or it is in globular shape. Such a globular shape makes it very fragile and can easily be ruptured when it is in hypotic solution. hypotonic solutions. Now, some of the properties of red blood cells are that red blood cells are mainly when you place them, when you get them out of a blood vessel, they normally pile up above each other and they form a pile, like a pile of coins, and that one is called Lowrex formation. Then they have a specific gravity of about 1.092 to 1.101. Then they have a packed cell volume. Now the packed cell volume is the same as hematocrit value. This is the volume of blood, or you can call it the volume of red blood cells in the blood sample expressed as a percentage, or is the proportion of blood occupied by red blood cells expressed in a percentage. Mainly, we expect it to be around 45%. 45% of our blood must contain red blood cells, and then 55% is plasma. We also have suspension stability, and this one is all about the uniform suspension of red blood cells when they're in plasma. Now, the lifespan of red blood cells is only about 120 days, and this was determined by scientists by using radioactive substances like chromium and iron, which were injected in the red blood cells, and these red blood cells that were tagged were later studied in saturation, and after 120 days they realized that they actually almost all of them were away. Therefore, we expect a red blood cell to become older by 120 days, and the cell membrane becomes more fragile and more fragile as the cells grow. Remember, we said as the cells grow, even their activity, their metabolic activity is deprived. Since the metabolic activity is deprived, this makes the cell membrane to become fragile. Even some of those enzymes cannot actually speed up these processes. And if you look at the structure and the size of a red blood cell, actually red blood cells are large compared even to some of the capillaries where they pass. Red blood cells are either equal or larger than those capillaries. And realize that as they pass through specifically the red pulp of the spleen, which has splenic capillaries that are very small, they end up rupturing and being fragmented. They end up being ruptured. And once they rupture, they release hemoglobin. Now, the hemoglobin is now taken up by the macrophages and phagocytized, and then mainly the macrophages, the Kupffer cells in the liver, the spleen, and the bone marrow. So now, once these macrophages break down the hemoglobin, we know the contents of hemoglobin are mainly iron, globin, and porphyrin. Now, the iron will combine with the protein apoferritin to form ferritin, which is stored in the blood and later reused. We stored in the body and later reused. Globin enters the protein pool of the body, or the protein depot of the body, for later use. And then porphyrin is degraded to bilirubin, which is excreted via the liver. Actually, it is first changed to bilirubin, and then later to bilirubin, which is excreted by the liver through the bile. Actually, this bilirubin is the one that makes actually our feces to appear that color of brown, the normal color of feces. Then realize that daily we keep on losing red blood cells as they die. However, the body keeps on manufacturing from its stem cells in the bone marrow and also other places. What are some of the functions of the red blood cells? The red blood cells transport oxygen, mainly from the lungs to the tissues, and they transport it in form of oxyhemoglobin, and this is actually about 93%. They also transport carbon dioxide in the body, and some carbon dioxide, about 30%, is transported as carb hemoglobin, and the other is transported as bicarbonate ions due to the presence of carbonic anhydrase enzyme that catalyzes out the process of hydrolysis of that reaction between water and carbon dioxide. So the destruction of red blood cells in the spleen is shown there. Now, you realize that we have some variations in the number of red blood cells. And red blood cells change sometimes due to the physiological reasons or variations that are taking place in our bodies, or sometimes due to the pathological reasons. Some of the physiological reasons that can change, maybe the change may be increase in the red blood cell count. And this is the increase in the red blood cells count is called polycythemia. It's called polycythemia. Now, polycythemia may be due to physiological changes like age, realize that babies actually have a high at birth. You realize that babies have a higher red blood cell count. However, it keeps on reducing, and realize that actually infants even still have a higher than than the adults, and this is explained due to the high metabolic rate they have in maintaining the body temperature and all other uses. Remember, these children are still growing. Then for sex, you realize that just like we explained earlier on, that males and females have different, and realize that males and females before puberty and after menopause actually have the same red blood cell count. However, those that are experiencing menstruation have a lower because of the monthly shedding of blood. High altitude also is associated with decreased supply of oxygen or low oxygen partial pressures. Therefore, you expect hypoxia, where the cells will not get enough oxygen, and therefore, since the cells will not get enough oxygen, we shall have stimulation of erythropoietin that is in the kidneys, and the kidneys will secrete it, and this will be taken to the bone marrow, enabling growth of more red blood cells. Sexual activity and also emotional conditions can also lead to secretion of adrenaline, which adrenaline will cause the contraction of the spleen, which releases red blood cells. Mainly, that is a sympathetic activity. Increased environmental temperatures, that's like we know temperature increases, everything will increase. So we shall have increase in the metabolic activities, and even the same thing applies to the production of red blood cells. Immediately after meals, remember, we need the oxygen to break down the food that we have eaten in order to provide energy. Therefore, we expect our red blood cell count actually to increase in attempts to provide the required oxygen. However, the red blood cell count can also decrease due to the physiological reasons, and some of such physiological reasons may include high barometric pressures, and high barometric pressures may be like very, very high partial pressures of oxygen, where the body will have high oxygen supply. Therefore, we expect the red blood cell count to decrease because they don't need so much to carry so much oxygen, because it is just readily available and can be transported. During sleep, you realize that the metabolic activity also decreases. Therefore, the body has very reduced metabolic demands. Therefore, there is decrease in the red blood cell count. Pregnancy can also lead to decrease in red blood cell count, given the fact that we have increase in blood volume. And as blood volume increases, we have increase in plasma. This plasma causes hemodilution that actually causes the scattering of red blood cells, making the red blood cell count actually to do what? To decrease. We have pathological variations that like pathological polycythemia. This is just an abnormal increase in the red blood cell. This may be in two types, that is primary polycythemia, which we can be called polycythemia vera. This one is caused by the malignancy of the red blood cells, where they become myeloproliferative and they start dividing indefinitely and forming very many red blood cells. Then we also have secondary polycythemia. This may be caused due to respiratory disorders like emphysema, congenital heart disease, Ayes disease that were normally associated with the hypertrophy of the right ventricle and obstruction of the blood flow to the lungs. It may be controlled. It may also be caused by chronic carbon monoxide poisoning. Can be caused by poisoning by chemicals like phosphorus. It can be caused due to repeated mild hemorrhages. That is, you keep on losing blood, but very little, so you end up getting polycythemia, the secondary type. And all these stimulate erythropoietin, and then poietin stimulates the bone marrow, releasing red blood cell, therefore increasing the red blood cell count. Now we have anemia. Anemia is just that decreased. Actually, when the red blood cell count decreases, that is anemia. And please, you will download, for more information about anemia, download my video about anemia, entitled Anemia by Dr. Jordan. Then variations in the size of red blood cells. Of course, the size of red blood cells change, and some of them may be due to physiological reasons, when they are slightly larger, or under pathological reasons. However, for the smaller ones, we call them microcytes. The larger ones, we call them macrocytes. And those ones with different sizes, we call them anisocytes. The microcytes may be due to iron deficiency, prolonged forced breathing, and increased osmotic pressure in blood. However, Macrocytes may be caused by megaloblastic anemia. When you download the other video of anemia, you'll learn about megaloblastic anemia. We have decreased osmotic pressure in blood. Then anisocytes, those ones occur in pernicious anemia. When you download the video on anemia, you'll learn about pernicious anemia. Now, variations in the shape of red blood cells may be also caused due to conditions like crenation, that is the shrinkage in hypotonic conditions, spherocytosis, that is like the globular form that we say due to the lack of spectrin protein. Then the elliptocytosis. That one makes the cells to have an elliptic shape. The sickle cell makes them to be crescent, and pyrocytosis makes them to have actually different shapes, like maybe a hammer shape, a flask shape, or any other unusual shape. Now, the variations in the red blood cells, their structure actually, the structure of red blood cells, we have punctate basophilism, and this one is mainly associated with the presence of dots in the basophilic material. That's a porphyrin. And this is mainly caused due to lead poisoning. We have ring in the red blood cells, where we see a goblet ring, a ring-like structure in the periphery of the red blood cells. And this is normally caused by some types of anemia. Then we have Howell-Jolly bodies. And this is where we see the fragments that are present in the ectoplasm of red blood cells. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe.